Hello, I'm Tyler Utterback. I'm a first sergeant with the Indiana State Police Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Division. And why we're here today is we want to talk about a section of the passenger carrying industry that's known as the private motor carrier passengers non-business. And what brings us here today is that we as the Indiana State Police have realized that this is an area of the passenger carrying industry that I'm not going to say has been neglected, but we have not been very active with our enforcement. And because of that, there's been a lot of areas of the community that believe that they're in compliance when they actually aren't, or there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of bad information out there about what do I need? I have this bus and we use it to transport people for this purpose and we're a nonprofit, and how does all of this tie in to being in compliance with state laws and federal DOT regulations? So I've gone out and I've given this seminar a number of times to try to raise the awareness and educate people on exactly what they need and how they get there. So we've found it to be quite beneficial. There's been some talk about some new rules, and there are going to be some new things to this that have been enacted in state law, but the majority of this has been something that you've needed to be in compliance with for a long time. There's really nothing new about it. It may be new to you, but it's not new, and we realize that. Our mission here is to get everybody up to speed, get them in compliance, and again, this is going to be focused on the non-business private motor carrier of passengers, and so we realize we're trying to reach out to the nonprofit, the volunteer groups, the not-for-hire individuals. This is what this seminar is designed to help you educate. Okay, so today the first thing we want to do is we're going to try to identify a PMCP non-business. That's private motor carrier passengers non-business. Probably use some acronyms today, and that's one of them. Also going to define what a private bus is. What is a private bus? Why is it that you need to be concerned with this? We're going to talk about a couple different variations of vehicles and some other terms that go around that. And then if we do find at the end of that whether or not this is the type of vehicle and activities that you have, are you subject to some of the federal DOT regulations as they're kind of known as. And then we're also going to cover a new state law requirement and how does that tie in. And I don't want to just leave you with, hey, here's all the stuff you're supposed to comply with. Now what do I do? We obviously want you to be in compliance. We're not really doing this at the seminars. I had to put a lot of people's mind at ease. I wasn't taking down names of those who weren't following the rules. I knew that many of them weren't following the rules. This kind of has come about in the last couple years. We've had a number of tragic crashes that involve church buses. This isn't going to be exclusively for just church organizations. It's going to be any private, non-for-profit type organization, boys and girls clubs or youth groups, and I have found that we've also had at some of the seminars, we've had nursing homes and other entities like that would show up. We even had some organizations show up that actually were a business and they were not a private motor carrier, and that was okay. There's a lot to this that overlaps. A lot of these DOT regulations will also apply to those organizations, but should that be you and you still are with us throughout this presentation, Whenever I speak of partial requirements to the regulations, for those business types or for hire carriers, that partiality is going to go away and you're going to have to fully comply with the regulations. Okay? So I'm going to start with, first of all, some legal jargon, the definition of a PMCP, private motor carrier passengers. That's found in 49 CFR 390.5, which is, and I don't have it exact here, but paraphrase it, a private motor carrier involved in interstate transportation. I'm going to emphasize a few words here because that'll be something I'll visit later on in the presentation. Interstate transportation of passengers that does not otherwise meet the definition of a PMCP business. So obviously we're going to define that there's a business and then there's also a non-business. And I'm going to speak mostly to the non-business. This is also going to include vehicles with a GVWR. There's another acronym, and I'm going to explain that further. A GVWR of 10,001 pounds or more, and that's even if it has a passenger capacity of 16 people or less than 16 people. All right, so there's going to be some specifics here that we're going to have to hash out to see what type of vehicle that you have, that you use in your endeavors with your organization. And what I suggest is that maybe you have some idea of what vehicles that you have, and maybe if you have multiple vehicles, just draw maybe a little square or a box on a piece of paper, and we'll just make kind of a check mark by some of the points that I'm going to address here as to whether or not this is even a vehicle that you need to be concerned with these DOT regulations or not. And it can get a little confusing, so you might take a minute and have something to take some notes on, okay? All right, so first of all, I'm going to address the term interstate, okay? Interstate simply means that you are crossing a state line. You're going from one state jurisdiction into another, okay? So I'm assuming that all of you are located here in Indiana, and you may be taking a trip to an amusement park or some other church or some other church activity or youth activity or some type of field trip of some type that takes you out of the state of Indiana. Well, that makes you interstate, even if you haven't left the state yet. If your trip, the intention of the trip is to your final destination is outside of the state of Indiana, then that would be an interstate trip, okay? So that's kind of an important term to understand, interstate, because the opposite to that obviously would be intrastate. You notice the different spelling, I-N-T-R-A-S-T-A-T-E, and that's intrastate. So that would be you just staying within Indiana. You're not crossing a state line. You may even be just staying in your town, in your community, or 3 or 4 miles down the road. Okay? So interstate, intrastate. Now if you remember, and I'll go back to that federal regulation, that federal definition, it mentioned interstate. So how does that apply if I just stay intrastate? Well, Indiana has a state law, and I can only basically theorize that our legislators realize that these federal regulations, when it pertains to what's the driver required to do and his credentials and his certifications and how does the vehicle need to be maintained, I could only assume that our legislators saw these federal regulations and realized that we have a lot of transportation that goes on just within our state that isn't going outside of the state. They're intrastate only, and that there is a concern to public safety that they are conducting business the same way that these interstate carriers are. Well, since the federal regulations only specifically address interstate transportation, our state law kind of filled that gap and has adopted those federal regulations by reference, so that it also applies to intrastate transportation. So even if you're exclusively staying in the state of Indiana and you don't ever have any plans of leaving the state with your vehicle, you're still going to have to comply with these federal regulations. And this is going to be the majority of what I discussed today. Okay, so now there is a little bit of difference to how these federal regulations are adopted, and I'm going to explain that for passenger transportation, it's only going to be applicable if your vehicle has a 16 or more passenger capacity. And whenever I say that, whether I say it's a 16 passenger or a 15 passenger, I'm also always going to include the driver. The driver is the driver, yes, but he's also a passenger in that vehicle. Okay? All right. Now, on that note, if it is a 10,001 GVWR and intrastate only, then if that is your vehicle, and then that's not going to be one you need to be concerned with, these federal regulations. And I'm going to get into that, and I'll kind of go over that another time in this presentation. Okay, and I need to explain this GVWR. All right, and I will get to that. Okay, so more than 16 passengers. Okay, I have a picture up on the presentation here of what I'm sure all of you have seen from time to time. Some of you may even have one for your organization and use it, or maybe you've ridden on one. And this looks to be an old school bus that's been decommissioned and sold, and some church or organization has bought it. This one actually says a church on it. And why I bring this picture up is that without a doubt we could all look at that and see that yes, that thing has more than a 16 passenger capacity. It's got plenty of seats in it, and so this thing was originally designed to transport more than 16 passengers. Okay, now I was very careful with my words there. Originally designed to transport 16 or more passengers, because inevitably somebody's going to raise their hand and say, well, okay, we took some of the seats out, or what if we never carry 16, we only carry 12 people? You know, what if that's all that we do with it, and we took a lot of seats out, now only seats maybe 15 or 14, does that change anything? Well, no, it doesn't. This is something that this has been tested many times over and over, all over the country, about, you know, not wanting it to be a 16 passenger or more vehicle. And it's because of the regulations that I'm going to talk about. And so this 16 is a very important number. And just kind of leave that topic to be is that really there's nothing you can do to change that. Okay, it's always going to be, even if you take all the seats out. So unfortunately for some, that may be bad news. Okay, so now I've got another picture of a different size vehicle, different type of vehicle, and you know, you may buy it brand new like this, or it may be something that you've purchased at an auction that used to be used by an airport somewhere, or a motel for transporting. If you've ever traveled, you may have been in one of these. Rental car agencies use these a lot. And well, don't know for sure whether it's designed to transport 16 or more passengers. I'm going to tell you that it probably isn't. These manufacturers of these vehicles, they realize that 16 is a very important number. All right, so a lot of times they build them and design them to be less than 16, usually around 15. All right, but then there's that GVWR again. We've got that acronym that I haven't quite talked about yet, and I know some of you probably think you know what it is, but and that's great. But you know, I'm gonna make sure that we all know, and I'll tease you with that for a second here. Designed to transport. So we have a top section of some different vehicles here, and this is pretty simple. You know, if you got a driver's seat and the front passenger seat, obviously we're going to only count that as you know, one passenger each. So there's two, and then you had this kind of not full length bench. So that's probably going to be designed for 3 people, and so 3 plus 3 is 6. Add 2 to it, so that would be an 8 passenger vehicle. and you would move to the next size, and now we've added yet one more bench, and it's a full-length bench, and that's going to be a 4-seat bench, and so you add 4 to the 8, and that'll make a 12-passenger van. And then likewise, if you add an extra 3-person bench, now we're up to 15-passenger. And you may see a lot of vehicles like that. You can kind of see what type of bench it is, or count the seat belts, or maybe even check with the manufacturer and see what they've rated it at. A lot of the 15-passenger vehicles kind of look like your larger van like this, a little bit longer. And you know, I understand you can take the seats out and in and out, but you know what, they've made these a lot of times specifically to be less than 16. And in fact, the slang term for this vehicle here is a 15-passenger van. Now, what we would need to know is, if you remember back, I was talking about this vehicle being 16 or more passengers. And if this is a 15-passenger van, well, then that takes it out of that category. But now we need to be concerned with this GVWR. And here we go, GVWR. And that stands for Gross Vehicle Weight Rating. This really has nothing to do with how much that vehicle weighs. This has to do with the rating, a gross vehicle weight rating. Gross vehicle weight is what that vehicle weighs. If we were to put it on a set of scales and you see what the readout reads on the scales, either by needle or digital number, and it's going to spit out a value in pounds, just like after Thanksgiving dinner we get on the scales in our bathroom, and that is, for some of us, could be gross weight. And this is gross vehicle weight, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a rating. This has to do with basically how well the vehicle was designed. And every vehicle is going to have a gross vehicle weight rating. Even the car sitting out in the parking lot that you drove in today, every large truck, trailers, they all have a GVWR. It's required by law that they have that. Typically, you could locate that somewhere on the specification tag or VIN tag, and I have one here on the presentation. And there's going to be a lot of information on this tag. Usually you find it in a vehicle inside the driver's side door. You open the door and you look somewhere on the door jambs and you'll see this sticker, and it's got a barcode on here, and this is the 17-character VIN, and it may have some other things about your tires and how the size of tires and the pressure rating that they recommend. And now that's GAWR. That's not what we're looking for. That's not it. And well, I have a nice red circle on the presentation here. Obviously, it's not going to be in your vehicle, but that says GVWR, and now it's going to have the value both in pounds and kilograms. So this one happens to be 11,200 pounds. So anything that's 10,001 or something bigger is what we're concerned with, okay? So to kind of bring this back all the way around, all right, and I'm going to go backwards on some of my slides here. So if we start with the vehicle that I started with, that's without a doubt, okay? So if you've got that piece of paper and you've got your different vehicles here, and maybe you have different sizes of vehicles, and you might want to make a separate box for each one, and you need to figure out, and you may not be able to do it right now watching this presentation. You may have to go back to your organization and count seats or just look for yourself, okay? So first thing I'm going to say is that if your vehicle has a seating capacity, an originally designed seating capacity of 16 or more passengers, and you use it for transportation, for purposes of your organization, whether it be a church or some type of benevolent group or a charitable group that maybe needs transportation of multiple people, some type of a club, private club of some type, and you use it for the furtherance of that transportation, and it seats 16 or more people, then literally everything that I'm going to discuss in the rest of this presentation will apply to you, okay? So that you could put a check mark there that no matter what, this vehicle, circle it, that's the one you definitely need to have everything that I'm going to talk about will apply, all right? Now, Where it's going to get a little bit more confusing for you is that if it's not that 16 passenger, okay, if it's something like that or something like that, that means that it's at least 15, and then now we need to ask a couple questions, okay? And this is where you can start putting some check marks by the boxes. You've got this vehicle in mind, and number one, do you use it for interstate? Do you use it to take trips out of the state of Indiana? If you say yes to that, then you need to put a check mark by that box, but we're not done with it yet, okay? The next thing you need to do is on that vehicle, it is going out of state, and if it does go out of state, does this gross vehicle weight rating, this GVWR, is it 10,001 pounds or more? And if that's a yes, then you'll need to put a check mark by that vehicle and kind of circle it, because this one is also going to need to comply with a majority of the rules that I'm getting ready to discuss, but not all of them, and I will tell you about that in a second. If you answered no to any one of those two questions, going out of state, no, I do not go out of state with this vehicle, then really all you're going to need is just to buy the plates and the insurance that you already do and have a regular operator's license to drive it, okay? There's really nothing else extra that applies here. Same if you do go out of state with it, and so long as you don't hook some kind of a trailer to it to add to this gross vehicle weight rating, okay? But if you do go out of state, but the gross vehicle weight rating is less than 10,001, then again, you will not need to comply with any of these regulations, okay? It will be only if you add something to it like a trailer, then you may need to be concerned with that, okay? All right, so now I'm going to move on to the regulations. Okay, this is the list of all the regulations that you need to be concerned with, okay? And I've made this list for the non-business private motor carrier passengers in mind, okay? If for whatever reason you're not meeting that definition of non-business, like for example, you're maybe a nursing home, or maybe even you could even be a church that offers some type of transportation for either direct or indirect compensation, then you kind of lose this non-business. And if that's the case, this list is going to still apply to you, but the only difference is when we speak of the partial part, you're going to have to be in full compliance with those regulations. And I will discuss some of the parts that you don't have to be in compliance with, but if that's the case, you need to probably research a little bit further as to what parts that are partial and what am I missing here. Okay, now as I go through this list, if you remember right, I had you kind of identify your vehicles, and hopefully you made some kind of note on a paper. I have this vehicle and it's this, it meets this, and at this point I should either have everybody with a 16 passenger vehicle or greater, or those who have that's not 16 passenger, they're over the 10,001 or over 10,001 or more gross vehicle weight rating and go out of state. You may have both in your fleet, but that should be the only two types of vehicles that I'm concerned with. Okay? Now, if you remember right, I said all of these are going to apply to the 16 passenger. Everything that I talk about from here on is going to apply to the 16 passenger or more capacity. Now, the first three parts that I'm going to talk about will not apply to the 15 passenger or less, under 16, okay? So the first three parts are going to apply to the 16 or more. All right, so let's start with the first one, Part 380. I'm not really going to talk about this one a whole lot because there's not much there to it for the non-business PMCPs. It is simply just some entry-level driver training. The federal regulations just want to make sure that if you use a driver that has less than 1 year's experience. And again, this is the 16 or more passenger capacity. That if you use a driver who's got less than a year's experience, that you cover some issues that are important for safety, such as driver qualifications and hours of service and vehicle maintenance and what to do in certain circumstances. And that's kind of some of the stuff I'm talking about today, okay? And that's about all I'm going to cover on the Part 380. Part 382, this one here is really important. And again, we're still only applicable to the 16 or more passenger capacity. This is the controlled substance and alcohol use testing, otherwise known as the DOT drug and alcohol test. Okay? First of all, every operator of one of these vehicles, 16 or more passengers, is going to have to undergo what is known as a pre-employment test. Now, I understand, and this is a lot of times where their hands come up, well, employee or employment, my guy's he's a volunteer. He's not an employee. Well, this is just kind of a little bit of how we're using the word employer, okay? I'm going to look at it this way. You're putting a person behind the wheel of a vehicle that's got 16 or more passengers, may have 20, may have 30, may have 60 passengers. And it's behind this large vehicle, and it's got your organization's name on it, and everybody believes that he's the one that's operating it safely, and everybody's trusting that everything's being done right. And this is a guy who's responsible for all the lives sitting behind him in the passenger seats, and they're trusting him and his abilities and how well he can handle himself in this vehicle, and his hands on the wheel and foot on the brake or the accelerator, okay? So that makes him an employee. It's very important. We're thinking mostly about the safety of the public here is what we're thinking about, okay? So everybody's going to have to go through this pre-employment test. That's part of the DOT drug and alcohol testing process. Every organization is going to have their own program, this drug and alcohol program. Now, of basically everything I'm going to discuss in this seminar, I feel like you have the possibility to be a do-it-yourselfer, I would say, except for when it comes to the area of this drug program. This does take some training and certification. It takes a lot of constant attention to make sure it's being done in accordance with the regulations. It takes a network of those that are trained and certified to actually conduct the proper DOT drug test and have it submitted for the 5-panel test, and that the chain of custody forms and the performance reports, and if should something come up with an issue, if there's a failure or if there's a refusal, and then what are the steps we're supposed to follow after that. So there's a lot to it, and this is where a lot of organizations fall short of being in compliance. They try, they don't do a very good job of it. Many of your school corporations and mid-sized to smaller companies don't ever try to do this on their own. They utilize what is known as a third-party administrator. I strongly suggest that you seek out a third-party administrator, and you could probably do that by just simply going to the internet and searching for DOT drug and alcohol testing or DOT drug and alcohol third-party administrator. There'll be probably a small fee to start up, and then they would probably charge per test that has to be given. A lot of times in this seminar, I'll get an example and I always get the hand goes up. It's like, well, can we just do our own? Can we go down to the local pharmacy and get the off-the-shelf drug test and just do that on a random basis? No, that's not going to do it. You need to comply. There's an entire chapter on how you're supposed to do this test program. Another hand will go up and say, well, we utilize Bob over here, and Bob, he works for the local school, and I know they test them, and so he's got his CDL, and he gets drug tested through the school. He's in their program. Does that, as long as I make sure they just send over the paperwork said that, yeah, he's in there, will that work? Well, it is possible. There is an interpretation in the rules that says that yes, that actually can be done. The problem with that is that there has to be some type of contractual agreement between your organization and, for example, the school that Bob works for. And the school Bob works for may have 200 drivers in it. And what has to happen is that school's drug and alcohol program now also becomes your program jointly. You're one. And they share everything and all the information. And there may be some very sensitive information in there. Not everybody passes these tests. And so it may not be something that the school just wants to open up and let their program to be yours, okay? And Bob may not always work there either. So it has a lot of, I'd say, obstacles, and I just really don't suggest that. It's way more, if you're concerned about doing it right and being correct about it, I would suggest that you seek out a third-party administrator. On that note, I would like to interject this, okay? At the end of this program, if you found out that your organization does not have a US DOT number and you register for a US DOT number, I'd like to let you know that once you do that, you're probably going to get solicited very heavily from all different types of companies that offer the training, the certification, maybe even being a third-party administrator, various degrees of consultation in all areas of these regulations. And I wouldn't just get out my credit card and start giving them your credit card number just so that you have the peace of mind of knowing that, hey, listen, I'm not going to do anything wrong here, okay? You might want to just consult with us first. You'll get stuff in the mail, you'll get emails, you'll get people calling you on the phone. All right, Part 382, Controlled Substance and Alcohol. This is only going to be for those with vehicles that transport 16 or more passengers, okay? And then because of that 16 passengers or greater, we're moving to Part 383, and that's the Commercial Driver's License, the CDL. And again, we're just talking with the 16 passengers or more. So what you're going to have as drivers with a CDL, they're going to have, if they have a Class A or a Class B, then they will have what they need to drive that bus. But you'll need to make sure that they have a passenger endorsement. There's an endorsement that comes along with transporting passengers, okay? It's possible that your vehicle only requires a Class C CDL, and in such case, then that's all they would have to have is a Class C, which is the lowest class of CDL. What determines that is it's still 16 or more passenger capacity, but now you're going to have to look at the GVWR on your bus and see if it's above 26,000 pounds. If it's above 26,000 pounds, so that means it would have to be 26,001 or something more, then you're going to have at least a Class B. If it's less than 26,001 pounds and it has 16 passengers or more, no matter how many people you put in it, then you're going to need the Class C CDL. And again, you would have to have the passenger endorsement in all cases. Okay? Okay, now I'm done with just exclusively talking to the 16 passenger or greater. Now I'm going to talk to everybody that still had the check marks by both types of vehicles. You've got the 16 passenger or more, and now we're going to also include the group of people and organizations that have a 9 to 15 passenger vehicle, has the gross vehicle weight rating over 10,000 pounds, and you go out of state. You just got to have those two yes questions. If that's the case, you're still with us here, and we're going to talk about the rest of the stuff, and now most of everything else I'm getting ready to talk about now is also going to apply to you. And we're moving into Part 390, which is the general applicability of these vehicles, and they're being classified as a commercial motor vehicle, okay? So that's going to start with registering with USDOT. That's obtaining your USDOT number. And you will have to properly mark, Part 390 has a lot of stuff in it, but you're going to have to go to Part 390 and read through that. But this is where it requires you to get a USDOT number, update your registration every so many years, and mark your vehicles with your USDOT number. The letters USDOT followed by your number, and then somewhere also would have the name of your organization that's associated with that DOT number. And it talks about how they have to be legible. It's posted on both sides of the vehicle, legible from 50 feet as the vehicle's standing still, and in contrasting colors with the background. There's no specifics on the size or the font that you use or anything like that, okay? That's Part 390. Part 391 is the qualification of drivers. And you'll see on the PowerPoint there that it says partial. That means that there's some parts to this that the non-business private motor carrier passenger does not need to comply with. And that includes you do not have to meet the 21-year-old going interstate requirement. There's a requirement that anyone driving a vehicle interstate like this has to be over 21. So you don't have to worry about that. There's a variety of things that get included in what's known as a driver qualification file that any of the other business motor carrier of passengers or property, they have to have these DQ files, driver qualification files, and they have to keep them at their place of business. And it's going to include inquiries, a background of checks, and their driving records, and a list of certification of the driver has to submit how many violations they had during the year, and you're supposed to check their driving record and verify the driving record with what the driver reported and certify that you've done that. And there should be an updated version of that in the DQ file every year, as well as a copy of the driver's medical certificate. Well, all this stuff, the private motor carrier passenger non-business, they don't have to worry about it. I'm here to tell you, I think you probably will in most cases, at least some of this, but that is a requirement. Should you ever be audited for some reason, like what we've had to done in some of these tragic crashes, we've had to go and audit, and those are some of the files that these organizations were not required to have. Okay, now what you do have to comply with in 391 is that the driver must be qualified to drive with having a current DOT physical, the medical card. All right, now, for those who have the 16 passenger or greater, and we talked about the drug testing and the CDL requirements, well, part of having a CDL, you have to have a current medical card to have your CDL. If you don't have a current medical card, then your CDL is going to be disqualified. So now, those who operate the 15 passenger or less vehicle, and they don't have to have a CDL, well, they still need the medical card. It's the exact same physical, it's the same doctor, list of doctors, it's the exact same type of exam that the CDL drivers have to go to. And now, there's going to be a little difference, okay? The non-CDL drivers are going to have to carry this medical card with them. It'll be a regulation that they have to have it. The non-CDL drivers don't necessarily have to carry it with them, but that's only going to be if we can verify roadside electronically in some fashion that they have a current medical card. So we've encountered this in the last couple of years since this regulation's changed. The idea is that with modern technology that we would be able to see this information about the medical certification through use of the computer, and that's worked pretty well in the majority of the cases. But not every officer is going to have a computer in his car, and if he does, it may not be connected, and he may not have access to the system, and computers go down for a while, and so it's suggested that they still carry it. And most drivers that we've encountered, they do still carry their medical card. Now, I know a lot of you are sitting here thinking, because this has come up in every seminar, wait a minute, what did he just say? You're saying that my guy, I've got a 15-passenger vehicle, I got to have a medical card? He just has a regular driver's license. Yes, that's true. He has a regular operator's license. He's got to have a medical card. He doesn't submit that medical card to the BMV. They'll look at it and they'll like, this guy doesn't have a CDL. I don't have a file to put it with. So they'll probably discard it. You don't need to submit it to the BMV. Only those who have a CDL do. You just need to have a copy of it and carry it with you whenever you're driving this vehicle for your organization. Okay? Part 392. This is going to be for everybody still. This is mostly addressing the driving of these commercial motor vehicles, these passenger carrying vehicles. And it basically says you have to follow a lot of the traffic laws. And it mentions in this regulation a lot of the common traffic laws as far as stopping at railroad crossings and not speeding and not following too close and not making unsafe lane changes and disregarding stop signs or stoplights, okay? All the things that you should be doing no matter what you're driving, right? Well, there's some special things to 392 that aren't really in a lot of local traffic laws, and this is going to be applicable to any state you go into, because we're talking about a federal regulation here. And it's also going to be applicable should you stay just in the state of Indiana for you 16 passengers or greater. And that's going to have to do with not operating while ill or fatigued. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when I get into the hours of service compliance. But, obviously there's alcohols and drugs, and the federal regulations are a little different. There's, lower tolerances, and you're not even supposed to have any of it in the vehicle at all. Texting and using a handheld mobile device, these are specific to the federal regulations, and they are a little bit more stringent than what our state laws are on texting, and basically you just can't even have that handheld device. You can't use it while you're driving a vehicle, and that includes sitting in traffic. So that's very specific. And then you need to inspect the emergency equipment, like your fire extinguishers and your either your triangles that you set out in case there was a breakdown, spare fuses for anything. So you're supposed to do an inspection. So this is all part of 392. Part 393, this is pretty specific to a lot of tolerances in lights and tires and brakes and conditions of the suspensions and the steerings and all the parts and pieces and components and accessories and emergency exits and warning devices and some of the emergency equipment that's required on these vehicles. So your vehicle would have to meet these regulations, and they're not going to be the same as what our Indiana state law says. They're probably going to be a lot more comprehensive. All right, so part 393. Okay, part 395. You'll see that I have a partial there, okay? This has to do with the hours of service. And again, the partial is only for you guys who are a non-business private motor carrier passengers. And this is going to apply to both sides of vehicles that we're talking about. And there's a 10-hour rule and a 15-hour rule. And I'm not going to really try to teach you about the hours of service here, but you just need to realize that there's, you can't drive more than 10 hours. You can't drive after having been on duty for 15 hours. And those hours are broken up by at least an 8-hour off-duty period. And then there's also a 60, 70-hour rule that is applicable. And that time is also included with, not just what you do for your organization or your church or your club, but this is going to be what you do throughout the week with your other employer. All those hours will count towards that work week. And this is where the partiality comes in, is that you're not actually required to keep a logbook or any records of the time, okay? Now, I have some ask, well, okay, if I'm not supposed to keep a logbook, then how are you going to know whether or not we're following any of this? Well, I could tell you, all right? Even those who are required to keep a logbook, believe it or not, sometimes are a little deceptive with what they put in those logbooks, okay? And we have a ways of finding out whether they're being deceptive or truthful, or basically whether they're accurate, okay? There's a lot of tools that we use and indicators, and I'm going to tell you that if you're hauling a load of teenagers to a camp somewhere, there's probably several witnesses there with cell phones and purchases they made along the way that are kind of going to make a trail and a timeline of events, okay? So it can be discovered. And plus, you know, for example, and I give this example, okay? So you may say, well, you know, when our guy operates the church bus, he's never really operating for that many hours at a time. We're not going to be taking a 10-hour trip. Well, you know, some of you might. I don't know. I mean, you never know what you may end up doing. I kind of give this to you because this is something you need to comply with and stay within these boundaries. So let's say an example, let's say it's a Friday and you have a volunteer member of the church who drives the bus. He's the only one that can drive the bus, and you guys are going to go to, let's say, Camp Mosquito, and it's several miles away, and your volunteer, let's say his name is Joe, and Joe, he has his own business, and it's his busy time of the year, and maybe he works long, hot days, and it's outside work, and you know, he may work 10, 12-hour days leading up to this Friday afternoon where we're leaving for Camp Mosquito, and now all of a sudden the kids are all loaded in the bus, and it's late Friday afternoon, and your driver Joe, he comes wheeling in at the last minute, and he's scarfing down a hamburger and a diet drink, and he's headed off. He's going to drive this group of 50 kids and all their stuff to Camp Mosquito for 2 weekends. And oh, by the way, and Joe is also he's also one of the camp counselors, chaperones. So, you know, so now let's say he's put in a lot of 10 and 12-hour days. He may already show up that Friday afternoon over his hours for the week to even be operating this vehicle. And if you got a 3 or 4 hour trip to Camp Mosquito, you know, you may be in violation of the hours of service rules. Even if he's not, if he watched it closely, he may have worked a long, hard week. And you remember back in 392, I talked about driving while ill or fatigued. And if he's not in the best shape to be driving that vehicle, he may be in violation. Okay? All right, so now Joe, he does what he's supposed to do, and he tried to rest, he took a nap, and he's just short of his hours, and he knows how long of a drive it is to Camp Mosquito, and all right, so they get down there, and remember, it's called Camp Mosquito for a reason, okay? And he pitches his tent, and he's sleeping on the ground, and now he's eating s'mores and beanie weenies and singing campfire songs and trying to stop all the teenage pranks and that are being done all through the night, because he's a chaperone as well, and maybe he's got some activities he does during the day on Saturday and Sunday, and so he's actually put in quite the week of operation here, and I'll tell you, you know, it's humid, it's 95 degrees, and the mosquitoes are terrible, and here it is Sunday evening, time to drive the bus back, and I tell you, I think after all that, you could very well, if you're not over your hours, you very well could be ill or fatigued. So these are things that you need to think about when it comes to putting that driver behind the wheel, okay? All right. Now, Part 396, and we're getting close to the end of it here. Part 396 has to do with the inspection, repair, and maintenance of your vehicle. And again, it's a partial, which means that there's going to be a lot of record-keeping requirements that you don't have to meet, keeping the records, but you do have to inspect the vehicle. You do have to have it inspected, and this is also where this new law comes in, the new state law. And this is really the only part that's new. Okay? Now, I'm still talking to both sizes of vehicles, the 16 plus passenger or those that are less than 16. Now, I'm going to also draw a line again though. Those that are less than 16, this new law will not apply to you, but you're still going to have this 396 inspection completed. Okay? The 396 inspection, I'm going to talk about it. It's in the regulation manual, and this is something that the Indiana State Police does not conduct this inspection. Okay? This is not something that where you take it to the state police and have it inspected. This is something where you're going to have to contact a vendor in your area, some mechanic shop. If you see a place in your community that has mechanics and large bay doors and they work on buses and trucks, I'm going to be safe to assume that that guy probably has the credentials to conduct this annual inspection, this DOT inspection. That's what you're actually trying to accomplish. Okay, you're trying to get that done. Okay, so now where this new state law comes in. So the new state law comes in and it's only going to be for the 16 passengers or greater. This is the new state law that was passed, and they use the term private bus. A private bus registered or the renewal of the registration, you must present an unexpired certificate of inspection. And this is kind of how the law was originally written. They added to it in the inspection specific part, and it says here that it allows for a 396.17, and that goes back to that part 396 of the federal regulations, and specifically the 396.17 is the annual, also known as the periodic inspection, and that you can use that inspection report, which is one you already have to do under federal law compliance for your vehicles. Now, you could take a copy of that and you can take it to the BMV to get it registered. And that starts this January. So any plate registrations that go on after January 1 of 2016, you're going to have to present. And this is only going to apply to the private bus. Now, under state law, the private bus, and I've summarized it here, it's used to transport passengers by a religious, fraternal, charitable, or benevolent organization and designed to transport, and there's that number, 16 or more, and that includes the driver. Okay? So simply all you're doing is you're taking the inspection report that you are already required to do, and I know that there's some of you out there that have not been doing that exactly. Maybe you've been doing something else, but it needs to be this DOT inspection. All right? You're going to have to get that certificate. Make sure you put one copy of it on the bus so it's always there and the driver knows where it is. And then keep another copy that you could take to the BMV. And the partial requirement is you don't even have to keep a copy of it, but I don't know why you wouldn't. I mean, it just goes to show that you're responsible and that you had it done. Okay? This is a copy of what one looks like. There's a website I'm going to show you where you could actually pull one down, a blank copy, and print it off for free. It's going to have some important information on it as far as something that will specifically identify the vehicle, such as like a VIN number or a plate number or a bus number. It's also going to have something that identifies the facility or the person who actually conducted the inspection on it. And this is another version of it, and that the important thing at the bottom is it's going to, whatever copy of it you get, it's going to have this language at the bottom that discusses that this vehicle, you're certifying that it has passed all the inspection items in accordance with 49 CFR 396. Okay, so that way you can look at it and we know that whoever's signing off on this has agreed that it has met those inspection requirements. A lot of the facilities that basically do these, they a lot of times they use a sticker, and this is a sticker that has a year, and then you could pick the month and date, put the date on there that it was conducted, The only thing I suggest is that if that's done that way, that when you use this sticker, that it's put in a place where the weather won't deteriorate the vehicle ID and who's done it, and or the dates on it, and the driver knows where it is. Also, if you're thinking like I am, if the mechanic or the inspector puts this sticker on there and that's your only documentation that you had it inspected, and it's already permanently affixed to the side of your bus, then I'm not sure how you're going to present it to the BMV clerk to show that you had it done. I really don't think she's going to walk out to the parking lot with you, okay? Okay, here's a couple of websites. If you need to get your US DOT number, the first one is that if you operate interstate, you need to go to www.safer.fmcsa.dot.gov. I could tell you that you could simply just go to fmcsa.dot.gov, and there'll be links there that will tell you, that'll say, how do I get my DOT number? And you can follow those links and you can get there that way. If you are operating just intrastate, it's only going to apply to the 16 passenger or greater, and you can go to the Department of Revenue's website, or call them at 615-7350, and that's a process you go through as far as getting your DOT number. Okay. This is not, the Indiana State Police does not issue the DOT numbers. They are done through the federal DOT or our State Department of Revenue motor carrier services. Okay. A couple helpful websites is the fmcsa.dot.gov, and then we also have on this website here, it's a compliance resource that you can go to. On this website, fmcsa.gov, I would like to steer you to this booklet that they produce called the Motor Carrier's Guide to Improving Highway Safety, and it's a very helpful tool to get you to a lot of areas of compliance. It's going to have basically everything I talked about today, and some of them is going to be in greater detail than I've discussed. It's going to have blank copies of medical cards and the entire medical certificate. It's going to have blank copies of the inspection report that you're supposed to have. Okay? It's going to have blank copies of that. It's going to discuss the private motor carrier passengers non-business. It's going to discuss that whole chart of all the parts that you need to comply with, just the same list that I went through. And this is my information. You can always contact the Indiana State Police Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Division at 317-615-7373. And my slide has a typo there. This email is CVED, should be info, that R should not be there, info and helpline at isp.in.gov, and there is a link to that on the Indiana State Police website, public website. Again, I'm First Sergeant Tyler Utterback with the Indiana State Police Commercial Vehicle Enforcement Division, and my goal is to help you get into compliance. We would like nothing more to get you there and to help you transport your passengers and further your endeavors and your organizations the best that you can. Again, Tyler Utterback, Indiana State Police. Please be safe out there and take care.